All right, we are live.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the weekly Atheist Republic Sunday morning hangout. I am Makisha. I mediate this shindig, and today with us we have Ali, Armin, Michael, and Todd so far. We may have people popping in here and there. And just to let you know, at when we're done, this will be posted on YouTube, and any relevant links or information that we talk about will be available in the description below. Today we're going to talk about atheism versus agnosticism, or also maybe just labels in general, how people identify themselves as atheists. If they do not, why not? People's feelings on the topic, is it important? All those good kinds of questions. And we also just have Andrew, who just joined us. So let's get started maybe with some of your understanding of the definitions of these terms. Maybe we can just talk a little bit about what is an agnostic, what is an atheist, is one a subset of the other? What is your understanding of that? And we can just maybe start with people's ideas, or I know there's like technical definitions, but people can chime in with that as well. But let's get started with that so we have some sort of foundation, and then we can go into all of the sociology of labels and such. So does anybody want to start with anybody who likes definitions? I can just give them, but
Go
Michael,
on,
I heard you unmute yourself.
go
Go
on, I'll
ahead.
dive in. Right, I mean, to me, I almost find the distinction unhelpful in the extreme. I don't like this idea of sort of labeling subsets of atheism almost. It just seems silly. To me, an atheist is somebody who, when asked the question, "Do you believe in any gods?" answers no. That's it. There's no need for any further distinction on that. That then is the umbrella term for people who believe in zero gods. They have no positive belief in gods. Whether you then claim to know for sure that there aren't any gods, believe that it's true or likely true that there are no gods, and have that as a positive belief, is then a subset of that umbrella set, to me. And that's my stance on it, and I find the endless bickering about it quite unhelpful, and seem to spend a great deal of time within the Atheist Republic discussion group hammering this out with people who seem to be desperate to be more atheist than the next atheist, and have some sort of pecking order. And I just find I tend to approach it from a very sort of scientific point of view, in terms of the claim that there exists some sort of God is an unfalsifiable claim by its very definition. Therefore, it's unsusceptible to testing. You can't test the claim. Therefore, arguing over whether you know the claim to be true or not seems pointless, and that would be my stance on it. I don't like the way that people try to sort of dodge the issue. The idea that you can be an agnostic as some sort of fence-sitting position between being a theist and an atheist just is a nonsense. But I'll come to that later on. Otherwise, I'm just going to be going on for half an hour. So that's basically where I stand at the moment, and I'll deal with what I just mentioned if people raise it as questions and so forth.
Okay, great. Armin, did you want to talk about definitions a little bit at all? I saw you raise a finger.
No, I just want to. I think for people that don't know what the conflict is between people, we need to provide like a basic explanation of what's going on here. The problem is that a lot of people understand that you have atheism, you have theism. Atheism is a lack of belief in God. Theism is a belief in a God or gods. And there's a misconception for a lot of people that agnosticism basically sits in the middle between these two positions. And a lot of people try to clarify that this is not the case. For agnosticism doesn't have to do with what the belief is. It's about the degree.
the strength of the claim if you have knowledge over what you believe in. Basically, in a simplified version of it is, do you claim 100% certainty in what you are claiming as your belief? So basically, in that situation, you would have agnostic atheists, Gnostic atheists, agnostic theists, and Gnostic theists. So agnostic atheist would be somebody that would say, I don't believe in a God, but I'm not going to go as far as saying that I have knowledge that there is no God. And agnostic theist would be somebody that says, I believe that there is a God, but I'm not going to go claim 100% absolute certainty and knowledge that there is a God. The reason why I think this definitions we could argue about the semantics of what are the proper words to use it, but I think it's very important. Even if we put aside the arguments between the atheists, I think when we approach the theist community, these definitions are very important, because among many people that I have at least talked to, among many theists, they don't seem to know the difference between me saying I don't believe in a God and somebody that says I believe there's no God. A lot of people see that as the same thing. So if you say I don't believe in a God, you're basically are making the positive claim that there is no God. And I think coming up with a way to separate these two claims and come up with definitions to clarify why these two claims are completely different is very, very important.
Anybody else want to chime in along that line, and then we can talk about people's personal thoughts on the matter? I will say that I think labels are one of those things that everybody seems to be frustrated by, but aren't going away. So I think there is I totally feel what Michael's saying, in that it's frustrating that we sit here and talk about what we're going to call ourselves instead of maybe just talking about what we feel is really important. But I guess the reality is that this is something that we as humans have always done, always tried to do, which is to align ourselves with like-minded individuals and cluster together in tribes and get on with living in that way. And so it is important in the sense that I think it's important, just in the sense that it's what we sort of naturally do. And so if atheists kind of just say, well, we don't care, we're just going to all call ourselves atheists, it sort of betrays the whole, what people are kind of wanting from us, and it puts us in a position where we can't actually articulate what we believe, which is actually quite nuanced even within atheism itself. So that's my feeling about labels. We do have some articles, blog posts and such on our website. If you just do a search for labels or agnosticism, you can probably find a bunch of those if you're interested in more of that. I think I saw a hand from Todd.
I'm glad you brought up the issue of labels, Makisha. That's one of the things that kind of stood out to me is, labels really function as a sort of conversational shorthand. And so they really have a practical use. The problem comes in whenever someone wants to put a label on you and define you strictly as that, and you are no more than this label. And that's where labels that's in my opinion where labels get misused. So I can understand some people being sort of averse to wearing a label, and others being wanting to be very precise in how we define it. I think another issue that we're running into, and one of the reasons that we have these discussions about what atheist and agnostic means and what the differences are and that kind of thing, while we have to keep having that discussion over and over, particularly with believers, is because they're being told it means one thing, we're using it in another way. So there's a fundamental disconnect between the usage of the word, and we're constantly having to redefine it. And it's even, I think it's being made worse by things such as presuppositional apologetics and that kind of thing, where it's all a word game, and you have to be so exact in what you say that one, if they can grab onto a word and the conversation is derailed, So I think it's made worse by that and by people who are trying that. So the conversation is definitely worth having, but and I agree with your point about labels, that they do serve a good function, but that's not those of us who would wear labels. That's not all we are.
Do we have anybody here in the group today who prefers, maybe in their everyday life, to refer to themselves as an agnostic as opposed to first an atheist? You would say, I'm primarily an agnostic? I didn't think so. I tend to, my official identification, self-identification, is an agnostic atheist, but that's probably parsing a little bit out more than what most people do. But I do actually take the time generally to go into what that means when people ask, because there is a huge, as Armin mentioned, there's a lot of misunderstanding, and there's a lot of thinking that atheists are all just clumped into one, and that they're all one kind, and it's usually the worst representation that people will cling to. So I like making those distinctions. If I feel like I need to be something that is clearer for people, I'll just call myself a humanist. But that can get muddy, as a lot of theists are also consider themselves humanists. So did I see a hand from Andrew M? I'm going to call you Andrew M and other Andrew. You're muted. Sorry, buddy.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So when you asked if any one of us identified as an agnostic, I think when I first started off on my internet atheist journey, I did. Because at the time it seemed to me like the most, and it was stress on at the time, it seemed to me like the most intellectually honest position. I could not definitively say that there was no God because I didn't have enough knowledge to make that statement. And I remember trying to defend that position once and just being destroyed by this one guy in the group, actually. And he made a comment that still kind of resonates with me today. And he said, are you agnostic about the tooth fairy? Because you don't have enough knowledge to definitively say that the tooth fairy doesn't exist. And it was that statement alone that kind of killed the whole label for me. How could, yes, it is intellectually honest, I guess, in a sense, to say, well, I don't have enough knowledge to say that there is no God, but I don't make that exception for the tooth fairy. So why am I making it for a deity? And so that was I think my transition from claiming that I was an agnostic rather than an atheist to just saying outright, look, I'm an atheist. I can't prove that there is no God, but I don't make that distinction for other things that I can't prove. And so I veered towards then making the claim that I was an atheist.
That is a really thought-provoking point. Armin, I think I saw a finger.
Yeah, well, the thing is that, yes, you are agnostic tooth fairy because you can't 100% prove that there is no tooth fairy. But the thing is that the point is, that's a good example why agnostic atheism does not give any credit to the existence of God, because I am also agnostic about Santa Claus. How seriously do I think Santa Claus is real? It's basically close to zero. And that shows that an agnostic atheist doesn't really, a lot of atheists that are say definitely there is no God, they think agnostic atheists are sitting on the fence and are just not willing to admit that there's no evidence. No, an agnostic atheist takes God as seriously as he or she takes Santa Claus. The reason why the labeling is important when it comes to, with a lot of things in our life, we don't waste our time to explain that we're not 100% certain. Like if you ask me, is your wife an assassin? I'm going to say no. But if I want to be really honest with everybody, I'm going to be like, well, I'm almost certain that no, but I can't be 100% sure that my wife is not an assassin. But why don't I go? But for the sake of practicality, we'll say no. Is there a monster hiding? Is there a murderer hiding under your bed? No. Every time am I going to answer these questions by I'm almost sure that there's another murderer under my bed? No. The reason why when it comes to God, we go out of our way to make it clear that this is not something that we can't prove 100% is because there's a lot of confusion when it comes to the God claim is that for you to not believe in a God, you have to have evidence that there is no God. And that's why we have to we have to explain why a lack of evidence means a lack of belief. Not having evidence that something doesn't exist does not warrant a belief in it. We don't have to do that with other things because it seems like believers understand that with everything else except with God. With everything else, they understand that you can't just believe that there's flying pineapples out there unless somebody comes and proves that there's no flying pineapples out there. They understand that with every concept except this concept of God, which is accepted as the de facto belief until somebody comes and proves that it's not true. That's why because the believers make that difference, they seem to understand that with everything else but except God, then we have to make that more clear with the concept of God than we have to with Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy. So that's why I do want to make clear that I'm an agnostic atheist.
And I think it's probably worth pointing out that we're obviously talking, and Armin, you touched on this, that we're talking. This is to a degree an academic point, but those conversations aren't worthless or trivial. I mean, these conversations about labels, what people call themselves, who they choose to identify themselves with, aren't meaningless, even though sometimes when you talk about it in our daily lives, it's not something we necessarily encounter all the time. So we acknowledge that this is very often an academic point, but that alone I don't think is worth throwing out the whole conversation just because it might be annoying and academic. So anybody else have any thoughts right now? I'll just kind of leave this as a little bit free flowing. Other Andrew. Don't forget to unmute yourself, or if somebody could unmute him, that'd be great. You're still muted. Okay, Andrew, you need to unmute yourself so we can hear you. In the meantime, does anybody else have any thoughts they wanted to share?
Yeah, I'd like to chip in on the thing that Armin and Andrew were talking about before, which is my angle on it is a lot of the time seems to come down to explain to people a concept called epistemology. Epistemology is understanding how and why we believe things and the hierarchy of belief. And it's worth just mentioning this. Belief and knowledge and belief and so on don't necessarily, well, they do overlap, and there's a really useful Venn diagram out there that I'll try and find a link for, put in the comments of the YouTube video when it pops up, to help people understand it. But knowledge is a subset of belief. There's also some really good videos on the Atheist Experience where Matt Dillahunty really does spell this out to callers. It's too long to go into now. But basically, knowledge is a subset of belief. We do not wait until we are 100% sure of things for what we believe to be true to inform our actions. For example, I believe that tomorrow I will go to work and I'll walk in and I'll go through my normal daily routine and the place won't have been on fire over half term. I don't wait until I'm 100% sure that the place hasn't burned down before I go to work, and I'm prepared to act on the assumption that the school will be there until such time as I find out it's not. And there's this idea that we need to be, that Armin touched on, that when we claim to believe something to be true, that we're claiming 100% knowledge. We're not. If you say you believe something, you're saying that you think it's true or likely true. You're not claiming 100% knowledge. And really, if you get right down to it, from an academic point of view, you can't claim 100% knowledge of anything, because we could all be brains in jars, etc., etc., etc. There's all these silly philosophical angles you can come from on this particular issue. But it's this sense of knowledge of how we come to believe things that seems to trip people up, and it's this idea that you are claiming, if somebody says something is true to you and you say, I don't believe you, you're claiming that their claim is false. You're not. You're just saying, you haven't convinced me that it's true. If somebody claims to me that they have a pet cat, I'll probably not argue the point. We'll just go, oh, really, what's its name? If somebody claims to me that they've got a pet dragon, that challenges everything I know to be true about the universe, which is that up until now the universe contains 0 dragons. Therefore, I'm going to be saying to that person, well, are you sure you've got a dragon? Are you sure you're not calling a cat, your pet cat, dragon, and I'm just misunderstanding you? Or do you actually mean there's a real fire-breathing dragon in your house? If they say, well, yes, there is, then I'm going to want some evidence of that. That does not mean that I'm saying I am 100% certain that they don't have a dragon. It's just like, well, I'm going to withhold my belief until you provide me with some serious evidence. If I turn out to be wrong and they haven't got a cat, and they go, ha 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 ha, I fooled you, I haven't got a cat, then, well, they're just being an arse. And I've not really lost anything by that. If I go around believing that there are indeed dragons because somebody says that they've got a pet dragon, then I'm being a bit of a gullible fool, because I've changed what I believe to be true about the universe. As in, I didn't believe before that there were dragons, and now I do. And people don't seem to grasp that. I posted a link in the chat thing. Can people who are watching it see the chat, or is it just us that see it?
I believe it's just us who sees it.
Right, okay. I'll post a link to it in the comments when it goes live on YouTube then, which is a video that I seem to find myself constantly spamming when this topic comes up, and then I'll shut up, which is, if you search for Burden of Proof on YouTube, you'll see a video by Qualia Soup that's about 8-9 minutes long, that's absolutely superb on this particular point of what we believe to be true, what we don't believe to be true. It's well worth anybody who's listening to this to go, okay, I'll go and have a look at that, if my ramblings confused you rather than informed you. Anyway, I'll go away now.
Oh, those are all really good points, and I think sometimes maybe reframing the issue is actually the most helpful thing. Instead of saying, well, let's just figure out what I'm going to call myself. Maybe we need to have a discussion about this whole belief issue first, and then go from there. So that's a good point, I think. Other Andrew, you are unmuted, and go.
Sorry, I just got this program installed, so it took me 5 minutes to figure it out.
No worries.
You guys can hear me now? Excellent.
Yes.
I was kind of curious about I'm not 100% certain that X doesn't exist, so I'm not gonna, I can't prove that God doesn't exist, so I'm gonna suspend my absolute disbelief. I tend to look at things in more of a scientific approach. It's impossible to prove that anything doesn't exist. But I maintain the idea that if God comes down, parks on my front lawn, looks me straight in the eye, hits me in the head with a thunderbolt and says, you were wrong. Okay, I was wrong. I'm willing to change my mind. I don't think I need to maintain even the potential for belief and limit myself by saying, well, I'm an agnostic about this. I'm 100% sure there is no God. If I'm wrong, I'll change my mind. But I can't imagine anything happening that will change my mind. And sorry it took me so long to get this thing working, but it's agnosticism is a label that I don't understand in connection with atheist in that regard. That was it. I'll try and turn myself off now. Wish me luck.
Thanks, Andrew. Next up we have, let me go to my list here, I think it was Allie.
Okay.
Allie, go ahead.
So I actually think that agnosticism is a very important label because a lot of people coming out of, especially from my understanding, I'll just go with Christianity because I know that the most, a lot of people coming out of Christianity can't really accept the fact they don't have that label anymore. And that label was a huge part of their life. I'm a Christian. That stood for so much. And all of a sudden lose your faith in God and to have to say, I don't believe in God anymore. That's kind of too scary. But the misunderstanding of agnosticism is that a lot of people come out and say, well, maybe there is a God. Maybe. And if I say that maybe there is a God and maybe there isn't a God, I'm not really betraying my old God, or I'm not really betraying my old friends, my family, or anybody by saying there is no God. I'm just saying maybe there isn't now. So that kind of step is very important for people coming out of their religion and trying to identify with a new group of people, because it does help them step out of Christianity and kind of into atheism, but they don't have to take that full step because they're scared. And it is a very scary step to take, to say, I don't believe in God. I know God doesn't exist. I don't ever say I know God doesn't exist because of everything that we have been saying. You know, it's a frustrating situation to be in. I don't want to have that burden of proof because I am making a claim God doesn't exist. So it's kind of that frustrating thing where, yes, I am pretty sure the tooth fairy does not exist. I am pretty sure God does not exist. I don't like to label myself as an agnostic. I definitely say I'm an atheist. But I think that people coming right out of religion really need that kind of center step.
Thanks, Allie. I also know people who use agnostic as a term to describe themselves because they're not interested in really engaging in the whole thing. They don't know, they don't care. It's sort of the apathetic position. They don't want to identify with atheists because in their mind atheists have actually put some time and energy and study and whatever thought into this and calling themselves atheists, and so they don't feel that would be necessarily intellectually honest, and they don't know any other term to use, and there are others, but so they call themselves agnostic. So it's the sort of catch-all for somebody who just doesn't really care to think about whether God exists or not. They're not sure, they don't care. So I have heard it used in that way as well. So next up we have Courtney.
Yeah, I think Allie made an excellent point about that step from religion to atheism, that you are an agnostic. I know for myself, I was an agnostic for 5 years because I couldn't shed that fear of saying that there was no God. But what I wanted to add was, a few years ago, I was a staunch opposition into including the name agnostic atheist to my label, because for me, I looked at all the gods that man has created, and I knew that none of those exist. Whether or not there's a supernatural, all-powerful being out there, nobody knows. But I think that a lot of people use that agnostic term even before the atheist term when they're getting into debates, like philosophical debates with people, because that way nobody can claim knowledge, and I think that that's more used that way. Like my son is a self-described agnostic atheist. He will not come out and say he's an atheist because he says, I don't know. So when he talks to people about it, he's like, I don't know, and you can't know either because there's no proof. So therefore, I don't believe because nobody has proved it to me. But I think that the two, now that I've actually done some research, I think the two go together pretty well depending on the situation. I never label myself as an agnostic atheist. I always just say I'm an atheist. But if I'm getting into a debate with someone who says that I know God exists, then I will throw in, well, you really can't. I'll throw in that philosophical epistemology argument saying, well, nobody can know because there's been no proof either way. So I think that it does some good even in the atheist community when you're trying to have a debate with someone.
Ren.
Am I unmuted?
Yep.
All right. Yeah, I think the definitions are where we have all the trouble with this. Almost nobody understands the definition of agnostic or atheist or belief. I find in these conversations, no matter how many hours it drags on for, it always comes down to, but if you don't believe something, you don't believe it. And it's that's where you end up with, because the definition of belief is not respected. If you believe something, you think it is true. You don't think that it could be true. You don't admit that you don't know that it can't be true. It is that you actually think that it is true. And that's what believing something is. So, I don't know, I hammer out these conversations with people a lot, and on the one hand, I tire of it. On the other hand, I think it needs to be done. People, when they finally get it, and I don't know how many times this has happened, where it took 3 hours of back and forth trying to explain the difference between Gnostic and agnostic and atheist and theist and belief and knowledge, and then to have them get it afterwards. And all of a sudden it clicks. Oh, that it is a dichotomy, that when you stop believing, you no longer believe. And right up to the point that you do believe, you don't. So everyone is either a theist or an atheist. There is no agnostic middle ground, and there can't be. If you can't say, I do believe, then you don't. And at that point, you are an atheist. Whether you want to call yourself that or not doesn't change a thing. It's just what you are. So that's all I got.
Hey, good timing as the dog runs in the room. Thanks, Ren. Andrew, and then Armin, please.
Yeah, just kind of a quick one. So I was actually in the background, kind of reading into the whole tooth fairy argument, and I kind of discovered that it was something that Dawkins had mentioned in one of his books. But there was somebody who I wanted to read something that goes against that argument. So I was curious to see what people had to say on it online. And I'm just going to throw this one out there. I don't know how I haven't formed any opinions on it. Maybe you guys would have some. But what he was saying was that the only way for the tooth fairy argument to be relevant is if teeth would disappear from under pillows in a way that science could not explain, because the distinction being that when we're talking about the existence of a God or not, science can't explain, or this is his point rather, so I'm not taking this position, but science can't explain why there was something where there is nothing, or rather, did the universe, how did the universe come into existence? I mean, we can explain, we understand the Big Bang, and from a certain perspective at least, but we can't explain. That's okay. So we're getting some comments on the right over here. So Michael's saying that's an argument from ignorance, and yes, that is true. But but I'm not so certain of my tooth fairy story anymore. But I'm glad we got some reactions from this. So I'm gonna shut up now and see what you guys have to say on this.
I love, Andrew, I love your willingness to just completely have your mind changed, like, so I don't say easily, because I know it's not easily. There's thought and intelligence put into it, but I love your approach to these conversations. Armin, and then I will let Michael tackle that one.
Oh, I wish Ren was here for this, because I wanted to respond to what he said. He was saying when somebody says they believe something, they're claiming that they know it's true. If you want to be really technical about it, that's actually not the case. There's a difference, between the definition of belief and knowledge, right? When I say I believe my wife is not an assassin, that means I believe it. I believe that she's not an assassin, but I'm not claiming knowledge over it. Oh, Ren is here. I'm just gonna. So what I was saying is that there's a difference between belief and knowledge. When you claim that you believe something, you're not claiming that you have knowledge over it. These are, by definition, two separate things. When I say I don't believe my wife is an assassin, I agree with you. I don't believe that. Like, I believe she's not an assassin. But to claim knowledge over something is completely different. And some philosophers will go as far as saying that there's very few things in life that we could actually claim knowledge over. Like, I could claim knowledge over the fact that 2 + 2 is 4, or that I exist. These are things that I could claim knowledge over, but I can't claim knowledge over the fact that my wife is not an assassin. There's a difference between claiming belief and claiming knowledge. But I agree that lack of belief in a God is enough for you to be an atheist. That's the definition of an atheist. If you don't believe in a God, you're an atheist. You don't have to go as far as, say, claim knowledge that there is no God for you to be considered an atheist. So a lot of people that don't want to call themselves atheists, and even some people that think they are not atheists, they are actually atheists. Just they could be uncomfortable with the label and not use the label, but that doesn't mean that we can't call them what they are. They are atheists. And labels are important. I don't understand why so many people are against labels. If they don't want to use it, that's fine. If you don't want to use a label, that's totally fine. But to say to others that labels are stupid, that's stupid, because labels help us communicate. If we didn't have names for things, then every time we wanted to communicate about everything, we would have to explain it from the start. If we understand what the definition of a word is, then it makes communication much, much easier. And that's why coming up with standard definitions for these words are very important, or else it's going to make all communication very, very difficult. And again, I do think that, you said, some people said that it's tiring and it gets very annoying to go over these definitions and discussing these labels, but I think it's very important, because we do, even if you don't agree with the labels and with the definitions, we do have to make the point that lack of evidence is enough for a lack of belief. Evidence for a lack of belief is good enough for the knowledge for claiming knowledge that something doesn't exist, but for claiming belief that something doesn't exist, but lack of evidence is enough for claiming that you lack belief in something. And even if we change the definitions of agnostics and atheists, that point somehow needs to be made, and when we make that point, we need to label it so we could communicate it easier. And I think the best way for me to clarify that to people is to say I'm actually an agnostic atheist when it comes to some gods, and I'm a Gnostic atheist when it comes to some other gods. For example, there are some gods that by definition they are self-contradictory. And when by definition you self-contradict your own definition, then I could claim knowledge that God doesn't exist. If that's just a logical impossibility, right? But because the concept of God is, the word God is used for so many different entities, and this it has such a flexible definition that people could come up with definitions that there's always, that makes it impossible to disprove. For example, the deistic God, then, you know, no matter how many gods you give me, eventually you're going to come up with a definition that there's no way for me to disprove. Therefore, towards a deistic God, I'm agnostic atheist, even though, and towards like an Abrahamic God, a God of Islam and Christianity, I'm more of a Gnostic atheist, because they have self-contradictory definitions. But I want to make it clear that just because you're agnostic atheist doesn't mean that you are, you know, contemplating believing in these things. An agnostic atheist still considers belief in these gods ridiculous. An agnostic atheist considers belief in a deistic God as ridiculous as a belief in a tooth fairy. Anyways, that's my rant.
Thanks, Armin. So did somebody have, our chat got a little confusing. I just want to make sure. Did somebody want to respond to Andrew's point?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Michael.
Right. The tooth fairy. The tooth fairy thing that Andrew threw into the ring is a shifting of the burden of proof. It's a sly one, but it's a shifting of the burden of proof. It's called an argument from ignorance. That's basically a logical fallacy. What the person is trying to argue is that lack of knowledge of something is in any way to the point, that if the proposition is unfalsifiable, that we have no knowledge of how the universe existed, therefore all possible ideas about the origin of the universe are on the table, and it's kind of trying to claim the null hypothesis as God, which is in itself a total fallacy. If you're going to claim that all arguments are on the table because we don't know how the universe came into existence, then that includes absolutely everything, including it was farted out of the backside of an intergalactic star goat, and the stars are the spatter from that because it had had a bad curry the night before. And you can go on forever more, because what you're claiming is to have some explanation for what you've just claimed is unexplainable. You can't have it both ways. The null hypothesis is, I don't know. And that's it. If somebody asks you a question and you do not know the answer and you're saying that it is not known, then you don't know. The instant you try to explain that, you're arguing from ignorance. And to say that your idea has any merit is utterly wrong. So the fact that science cannot fully explain the thing that happened just before the Planck time yet, because they're hitting a brick wall in terms of actually explaining that little tiny interval of time and having any evidence to support what's going on, is neither here nor there. It's an argument from ignorance, and it's, if you Google it, people that are watching this that are thinking, what's he talking about? Google God of the Gaps fallacy. If you Google God of the Gaps, Google will throw just about the entire internet at you, and you can find out all about why the God of the Gaps is absolute nonsense. So it's a clever idea. It's this idea that, well, we do know that it was just your parents reaching under the pillow and sticking pennies under there. Yeah, but tell that to the child that still believes it. The child that believes fervently in the tooth fairy has no explanation for that and will say, well, I believe it's a tooth fairy because I can't explain that. It's a little sneaky trick where you take something that you actually have knowledge of, pretend that you don't, then pretend that you can explain it, then say, well, if we haven't got knowledge of something, therefore I can say that it's God, and I've got just as much right to that idea as you have that there's some physical and material explanation for it. It's nonsense. Anyway, hopefully that's killed that one off. Andrew, have you found a convincing argument for agnosticism yet? Are you going to come back with something or not?
Okay, Andrew, I'm going to give you a chance to respond.
Okay, cool. No, okay, so that was properly trounced, but I So like I said at the beginning, I do very, if we're to adopt a label, I would definitely say I'm an atheist, not an agnostic. But I'm feeling like agnosticism is being poorly, or rather underrepresented in this particular hangout. So I'm gonna carry that flag for them and try again. So I'm gonna read off a comment I'm reading on another forum, and they're saying being agnostic does not mean that you border on being a theist or an atheist. You are not required to pick a side of the fence. You can look at both sides of that fence, appreciate the merits of each side, but continue to suspend belief based on lack of knowledge. Which, at face value, makes sense, right? I mean, all right, so Todd is going to go for me this time. Right, so it's a matter of you're looking at two opposing arguments. Maybe opposing is the wrong word. And you're just saying that I don't have enough information to make an informed decision on either one of these particular arguments. And so at face value, I don't see anything wrong with that, but I'm sure I will be corrected, so I'll leave the floor back open to the rest of you guys.
Andrew's taking one for the team. Way to go, Whipping Boy. All right. I believe Todd wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is it comes back to the difference between belief and knowledge. There are two different issues, and you can't sit on the. Really, there's no fence sitting of the. There is a binary claim. Some God or gods exist. That's a binary proposition. That's either it's either positive or negative. It's either yes or no. The null hypothesis is no, based on until evidence is presented that something like that does exist. It comes back to all these different issues. It comes back to the burden of proof is on the person making the positive claim. It's part of the confusion, and I've heard the analogy used. Part of the confusion is people think there's a difference between the opposite of guilty is innocent, and it's not. That's not the opposite of guilty is not guilty. That's the proper opposite. That's a proper dichotomy. Innocence is totally different. So there's that slippery thing in there where you have people saying, well, if you don't believe this, well then by default you're saying that there is not one. As far as belief, yeah, I don't have a belief in a God, so that makes me an atheist. Now my degree of certainty about the absolute nature of that, are there absolutely no gods at all whatsoever? The degree of certainty that I'm willing to put in that particular statement, and that really kind of depends. It depends. Well, what do you mean by God? Because there are some definitions of God that are internally, as Armin mentioned before, they're internally contradictory. They have internal incoherence, and so about those, yeah, those fall apart. Those don't even get off the ground. Those are impossible. As far as the other ones, well, okay, those are logically possible. So let's demonstrate. Let's have some evidence that they are actually real. Logic, and that's one of the things that I think the apologists have done properly or have done successfully, is convincing large numbers of people that you can argue or define something into existence, and you can't. The soundness of any sort of logical argument depends on corroborating evidence. If you claim something's logically possible, okay, all right, there's no internal inconsistencies in your definition. So does it actually exist? That's a different story. And whenever it comes down to is any evidence presented? No. All right, then I'm going to continue the null hypothesis that thing does not exist until it's proven that it does. And that's what took me a while to get past the agnosticism thing, that it's not a middle ground, that there is a difference. I can be I can be agnostic as far as in the sense that I'm not going to put 100% certainty in the in the claim that there are absolutely no supernatural entities and no gods of any kind. That if I'm not going to put 100% certainty in that, then I guess you could call me an agnostic. But that comes back to, what do you mean by agnostic? How big of a degree of certainty are you going to have to put in something before you count it as knowledge? And that's ill-defined too. That's going to depend from person to person, and that's also going to depend on the claim. And coming back to what Michael was talking about, all claims aren't created equal. So if there's not, if certainty isn't established here, and we have several options, okay, well, let's look at those options. But you could throw out the Stargoat thing, which I love, but that doesn't mean that it's going to get equal credence, that it deserves equal time and equal consideration, because all claims aren't created equal either. So a lot of these things will fall apart. And agnostics, in the how you'd mentioned it, Andrew, is sitting back and weighing the evidence and not really deciding one way or the other. Well, yeah, you have, because it is a binary proposition. And if you don't, and if you say that there is a God, then okay, you're a theist. If you say anything other than that, you are an atheist, by definition. And so agnosticism is, to me, that's where it flies apart. And it's talking about something completely different. It's talking about knowledge, and you're getting into epistemology and some very complex things there. But to keep it simple, if you say yes, you're a theist. If you say anything other than yes, you're an atheist.
Courtney had some thoughts related to Andrew and Todd.
Yeah, so Todd kind of summed it up a little bit at the end, like if you say anything other than yes, you are an atheist. I think that the agnostic term, just being the term itself, is able to be shaped into what the person wants it to be, because it is kind of that abstract, I think. And to kind of go way back to Allie's point, because I think that point kind of just got shoved off, it is a very important label, and I don't think it should be discredited along with Allie. I don't think that agnosticism should be, thrown out the window, because you can't go from being a theist to an atheist in your mind. It's a difficult process for a lot of people to come out of religion because of the fear that you were indoctrinated with. So like Allie pointed out, when I said that maybe there's a God, I don't know, it doesn't feel like you're rejecting God or rejecting that belief. You're just like, I really don't know. So in your own mind, you're not fearful that God is going to strike you down or to make your life miserable, or I know and it depends on what God you're talking about, but the Christian God is what I'm referring to. You have that fear. So agnosticism, I think, is an important label. And I know that Michael was like, well, and Todd basically were like, well, no, you're either an atheist or you're a theist, but really inside your own mind, you're not, for a lot of people in that transition process. And for the longest time, I hated the Dawkins scale, that 1 to 7. I hated that scale. But now I think it's kind of like that stepping tool from theism to atheism, depending on where you're at in your process. Like I said, for myself, I'm an atheist. If I want to get into a debate with someone and it happens to be a philosophical debate, yeah, I'll throw in agnostic just because, nobody can claim knowledge. But my son is completely different. He's apathetic. He wants to say, I'm an agnostic atheist in order to not offend people, but in order to also say, I don't believe in a God or gods, but I don't know if one exists. I can't claim that knowledge. So that's what I wanted to add.
I wonder how much of this sometimes, and Todd mentioned something that I don't want to lose track of, which is certainty. That's a word that we haven't really brought into the equation here. We have knowledge and we have belief, and then there's certainty. And I wonder how many of these labels and identifiers that people have are related more to their personality or their level of comfort with how much certainty they communicate in the label they claim for themselves. I think maybe sometimes an an atheist who somebody who's an atheist who says, I know there is no God, I hate religion because they believe in a God or whatever, and then somebody else comes along and says, well, I don't believe in a God, but I'm not like that person, and I don't want people to misunderstand, and I have this sort of wibbly-wobbly in-between place, and some people are just really uncomfortable with having that binary. It's not a place that it's not something that they really want to claim. So I wonder how much of this is related to that. Andrew, back to you.
Right. Okay. I'm going to paraphrase, and I've been reading through this stuff pretty quickly, so I probably paraphrased quite poorly, but this one was fairly interesting. So I'm going to adopt its point for the sake of this hangout. So the proposition is this: if you are debating a theist on his position as to the existence of God, and you inevitably request evidence of that God. You say, listen, if I'm going to adopt your position, or if I'm going to believe what you believe, or begin to make the way towards saying that I'm a theist, you'll have to demonstrate that your God does in fact exist. And this is, of course, the end-all, because there is no evidence, or at least they can't provide any. And that it's ace in the hole, right? It's what atheists use on most online forums. They'll just give me some evidence beyond you pointing at the stars and the trees and saying, "Oh, look how beautiful that is." Kind of been random. On the flip side of that, if you're going to adopt any position other than agnosticism, you are in a sense adopting, and to Todd's point, the binary of saying, "Well, I don't believe, hence I'm making a statement in the negative. There is no God." And then you have shifted the burden of proof onto yourself, because you are now have to provide evidence for that statement in the negative. Once you are saying that this thing that you are proposing does not exist, you have to demonstrate that it does not exist. And that's where agnosticism kind of fits in the cracks for most people, because it allows you to say, well, provide evidence. Oh, you can't provide evidence? Well, in that case, I'm not going to adopt your position. However, I can't provide evidence in the negative. And so there's something to be said there about that position. I'll stop now and leave the floor open to you guys.
I actually do agree with that particular position, by the way, what Andrew just said. Any other thoughts related to Andrew? One thing I do want to point out about what Andrew said is, and this, again, this is where I think it gets tricky, and Armin mentioned this as well. You said, when you were talking about that particular position, you said, I don't believe, and then I think you sort of went right into there is no God. And that's, again, that's the belief knowledge thing. And I think that's what constantly, like, it just keeps coming up and it keeps tripping people up, where so many theists I know, for example, they think that to be an atheist, there is that certainty, that knowledge. I know there is no God, and that's where I think we keep getting hung up, and that, which brings me back to my wondering of maybe this is something that just really we need to clarify this whole knowledge, belief, certainty issue before we can, really even have these conversations sometimes. Did anybody, so I'm trying to look at the conversations over here. Did anybody want to, we're coming up on our hour, so does anybody have thoughts, responses, and then I think Todd's going to sum us up. Anything that you feel like you really want to share before we go? Ren.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention real quick on the what Miguel was talking about earlier with arguments from ignorance, that we always go in hand with the burden of proof fallacies that we see in this continuously, is when an argument from ignorance is being made, you can translate that as saying, we can't know, therefore I know. I mean, that's really what people are saying when they make that argument, and it's internally inconsistent with itself. So I just wanted to point that
out. Michael.
Yeah, just very quickly, the point that I'd make is that it's kind of like, it comes back to the epistemology thing, and I think I tend to nail it quite often by this simple structure, which is, we address one horn of the dilemma at a time. The proposition is that there exists at least one God. Do you believe or disbelieve that proposition? And it comes down to what Todd said before. It's this dichotomy thing. It is a true dichotomy is A or not A, not anything else. So it's just basically, do you believe or not believe? And anything other than yes, I do believe, you're an atheist. Whether or not you're comfortable with labeling yourself as an atheist or not, that comes back to what Ren said before. It doesn't matter if I'm comfortable with labeling myself as a human being. That's what I am by all definitions of all reasonable things, and I can continue to insist that I'm a species, just a different species of great ape, all alike. The two aren't mutually exclusive. You can be agnostic and an atheist, because you can not claim knowledge, but you can claim that you do not believe. It isn't, being an atheist is not saying that you believe something to not be true. It's saying that you do not believe the proposition that there exists at least one God. That's it. To me, that's the beginning and end of the discussion. However uncomfortable the person on the receiving end of that discussion is with labeling themselves to be an atheist. And if it's done gently, quite often people go, oh, actually, it wasn't that threatening saying that I'm an atheist after all. I just don't believe something. Is that all it is? And they just trot off quite happily. I think if you make it into this big thing, then yes, it is. Anyway, I'll shut up now and let Todd wrap up.
I like the image of people just trotting off after we talk to them. It's a great image. Okay, Courtney had a last thought, and then Todd, and then we'll close up.
Yeah, just real quick. I think when we're discussing belief, maybe we should shed the agnostic label, because it doesn't deal with belief; it deals with knowledge. And maybe the agnostics who label themselves as that should just label themselves as deists.
Oh, sorry, couldn't get myself unmuted. I think that's a great point, Courtney. Todd.
Allie brought it up first, and it's been referenced a couple of times. And there's been words used throughout the discussion that are very emotional words, uncomfortable, that kind of thing. And one of the problems with labels being, it being functionally just conversational shorthand, is that they get all these other things bootstrapped onto them. A lot of the things, several things are, oh, well, you're an atheist, so you believe this and this and this and this. No, not necessarily. So it requires a good bit of explanation because of all the things that get bootstrapped onto it. But a lot of the things that it also carries is emotional baggage and emotionally loaded words. For instance, one of the new ones now is feminist. Are you? You define yourself as a feminist, you're going to have to define that word a little bit more closely for a lot of people because of the emotional baggage that it's taken on in recent days. And I think one of the things that we're seeing from believers especially, they ask if you're an agnostic because they want to know how willing you are to change your mind. They want to know if they want to have some sort of emotional support and sort of emotional assurance that you're not going to just come at them full charge. And I think that's one of the big components about it with it. And it's a very emotional. Agnostic is an emotionally comforting word, but whenever you dig down a little bit deeper, you kind of see there's really not much to it, and it's easily scrapped. But I do appreciate the fact that some people that I think really most, or at least a lot, have to go through that emotional adjustment period of releasing this and going into the in-between. Yes, there is. Maybe there's not. Okay, no, there isn't. It's a grayscale thing. So I've found, especially in recent discussions, that whenever I identify myself with Christians as an unbeliever, that functions better conversationally because it doesn't have all the emotional baggage and it doesn't have all the different things bootstrapped onto it. All it says is that I don't believe you. So just for functional conversational purposes, I've been using that recently with some degree of success. But I think the emotional component of language, of what we say, and our experiences and the experiences of people that we're talking to can't be discounted because language is how we express those things.
Very good point, and good points all around. Great thoughts. It sounds like there's some momentum around a lot of these issues. Maybe we can flesh them out into another topic for another Sunday. So thank you all for joining us today. Thanks for all who are watching. Join us again next week. We'll have some links and such in the YouTube post when that goes up later today. Thanks, everyone.